Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm Beth Bailey, and today I'm excited to be joined again by Will Selber, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force and a volunteer with the non-governmental organization Operation Sacred Promise, which works to evacuate members of the Afghan Air Force and Army Special Mission Wing from Afghanistan. Today, we're really excited to have you here, Will, to talk about the evacuation of personnel from, of everyone from Afghanistan in August of 2021 and the role that you played in those pivotal weeks and months. So thanks for being with us and talking.
Thanks for having me on again.
That. Yeah, glad to have you. This is going to be really interesting because you have such a unique background and you were getting involved in, I think it's best to start with, when did you get involved with the NEO and the, all of the evacuation operations that were ongoing in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I was in Afghanistan from June of 2020 to June of 2021. I was at the embassy I was at the defense attaché office there. And so I left, and then probably about 3 weeks later, I assumed command of a squadron. So I became a commander, and then I started to see kind of the writing on the wall. I think when I got really nervous was when, the first province fell, and I kind of figured that there would be some that would fall. When we were there, we were like, you guys are going to have to hold some of these places. You're going to have to let some of them go. I had conversations with various senior ranking Afghan officials. But when I saw Jalsjan fall up in the northern portion, or Dostum was stronghold, that's when I knew it was going to fall. And so I was still in command. And then, I think the 15th was actually either on a Sunday or a Monday. I don't remember exactly when the Taliban came into Kabul. And I was, I'd already started getting texts and phone calls from Afghans. I started texting some of my former compatriots, seeing where they were. All of them were in the airport by then. And so I would say about 3 days after, maybe on the 16th or 17th, I got a phone call from my former organization that I worked with. And they asked me to come up to DC and help them basically with the NEO that was going on. So I left command and I flew up. My wife was here at the time with our 1.5-year-old daughter, I think, maybe 1-year-old daughter at the time. And yeah, it was crazy. I flew up, walked into our higher headquarters. I think I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts and flip-flops. I walked in and it was like a TV, like a movie, like everybody's running around. And I just kind of walked into my former boss and I was like, what's going on? And where do you need me? And, that's a T-skiff. And so they had stuff they had to do. So I told them that just give me some phones and I'll start getting people in. So we made the decision at that point in time that I was going to get headquartered at a hotel in downtown DC, and I was going to work with my former interpreter who had just gotten back from Kabul. He was on the first wave of the NEO, had just came back, and me and him were going to get people in. So that's how it started.
That's incredible. I actually want to go back to June of 2021, because is that when you started to see those places fall, or did you have an inkling? It sounds like you had an inkling that things were going on, but really the things started to fall in August. So what was it like in June of 2021 being at the attaché's office?
Yeah, it was, I would say that I didn't think it would fall that fast, but I was worried about it. I think it's I think it's safe to say that what was going on was the ANA was hollowed out at that point, pretty big. It was maybe half the strength, maybe 150,000, 200,000, something like that. And they were really, the organizations that were really being used at that point were like the ANASOC, the commandos, and then the Afghan Air Force. Those were the really big heavy hitters. And unfortunately, they were being used so much that they were kind of wearing down. And then when President Biden announced the withdrawal, the problem is that the enablers went, right? And that was the big thing. as that the enablers, the people that were able to not just fix the airplanes, but also just do like regular finances and pay. So when that kind of happened, we started to get the inkling that this was going to be a pretty bad situation. There was a lot of problems throughout the entire year I was there. I mean, I kind of saw the whole thing, and people, kind of forget that that was in the middle of COVID. So a lot of our partnering was kind of down at that point because of the disease, and then also, I would just say that the Taliban were doing a really brutal assassination campaign all throughout the country. And so a lot of guys that I knew and I met with and I engaged with were getting killed at that time. And it was very, very effective throughout the entire year. And you could see the morale really start to go down throughout the whole time. And, indicators of people like when I first got there, I'd meet with people. And then by the end, it was people were wearing, body armor to come visit me. People were straight up asking me like, hey, you need to get me out of here. I need a visa. Like the amount of that going on was just increasing. So by the time I left, I was very worried.
Interesting to hear all that, because you clearly are witnessing this buildup, and I hadn't heard anything about the assassination campaign prior to
Yeah.
the Taliban taking over, maybe little bits and
Mm-hmm.
things. But I wonder then, we talked to other people who were at HKIA, and
Yeah.
they said that, they were sent there because it was an emergency situation.
Sure.
They were over in other locations. Why did you witness any attempt to prepare for this neo, or was it just kind of like things are getting worse and we don't really know what to do yet, or had you missed that critical
Yeah, there were
we talked to
preparations the entire year. I mean, I think
okay
why they, I wasn't privy to the that wasn't, that's the Marines that planned that. Why it was HKI, not Bagram and stuff like that, they would have more information on. But yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that nobody and people knew it was in trouble, and there was a lot of talk about when it was going to fall. Like it was going to take that one thing, and it was going to be quick. I think everybody knew it was going to be quick. And it was just the bottom fell out. And I think that I think people, and you've seen this in cigar reports, in their articles of when we announced that we were withdrawing, like it was a huge morale drop, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the Afghans, and people don't realize is that for a lot of them, they kind of believed us. They didn't believe us because we'd been saying it for 20 years. Like, we're going to leave. We're going to leave. No, this time we're really going to leave. So, I'm talking to senior Afghan government officials, and I'm like, you guys, this is really going to happen this time. This isn't going to be like before. We're really leaving this time. And so I think the morale at the mid-level and lower level was already pretty low because of some of the Doha agreement stuff. Because when we released the 5,000 prisoners, that was another big blow to morale. Talking to people, they were really scared. They didn't understand why we were letting these guys out. They didn't think it was a good trade. That was common throughout when I was talking to senior Afghan government officials. So, yeah, I think I wasn't surprised that it fell. I was surprised by how fast it did. But it was going to be something like that. It was just going to be one thing, and then the chain reaction starts.
Sure. And I've heard too, and maybe you can comment as to this, from, in fact, I can think of one man in particular who was a pilot, and he told me that, they didn't get enough weapons to be able to do their job. So they weren't left with enough, I forget what he called, it was some kind of like rocket or something to go and fight the enemy. And so if you can't actually protect your troops on the ground, it's not entirely morale. Maybe it's also supplies and the things that you need to do your job. Did you see any of that, or have you heard it, especially with your work with Operation Sacred Promise? I mean, you're talking with these people, I'm guessing. Do they say?
The Afghan Air Force ran out of ammunition. I mean, it was used a lot. Towards the end, the corps. So there was a lot of problems. Part of it with Ghani. He kept on changing corps commanders constantly throughout the second half of 2020, and then really into 2021, he was just rotating them around. So the morale in Kandahar was really low. Had some really bad corps commanders down there. They weren't very good, and they weren't aggressive, and they weren't going out. So they were using the easy button, which was just have the Afghan Air Force drop bombs. So they were running out of supplies, and it happened a lot. And you could see it, with the pilots on the one hand being like this is a target that you don't need us to use these ordinances on. You guys can go out there and get them. But in a lot of the corps, they just were really hollowed out. And unfortunately, the young corps commanders like Sami Sadat, not Hibatullah, Alizai, General Alizai, who was the last head of the Afghan National Army. He was the Anasat commander towards the end, and then he got elevated. Some other guys like Mustafa Wardak. These are some guys that were younger that had kind of come up through the American system. They started to get put in at the very end, but at that point it was too late. There was stuff like that going around where they were running out of ordinances. There has been some resupply, but it was just you couldn't keep up with it because it was the easy button to always push was the Afghan Air Force.
Sure. And I can imagine, though, in places like Kandahar and Helmand,
Yep.
which would be the places you would first think would
Sure.
fall to the Taliban. I wouldn't want to be
Yeah.
on the ground probably in those. I cannot imagine what it would have felt like to be a member of the Afghan military at the time when all of this was happening and places are falling and your friends are getting killed. It's been quite an ordeal for all of those people. And we've heard a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about whether they did enough.
Sure.
And I think it's got to be hard to make that value assessment unless you've been in their shoes. And personally, I would not have wanted to.
Yeah, I think shoes. If you watch, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a really good one. I know Sami Sadat. He's pretty well, and it was very sad to see that happen to him. He was a very, very charismatic and really hard-charging commander, and I wish he would have been in charge a little bit sooner, and they would have pulled him up to Kabul months before. Yeah.
Yeah, if this were an interactive event, I can imagine some people right now saying some things because he definitely inspires those kinds of feelings, but he also inspires opposite kinds of feelings. And that's the interesting thing about the path forward for Afghanistan is that there are a lot of, things that tend to mark people in this war.
Yeah, there was, I think that he was controversial. There's some allegations against him, and same with Razik in Kandahar in the 2000s. I would just say that you're not going to have anybody who's going to have his hands completely clean.
No, absolutely not.
Not there. No way.
No. It's been decades of brutal war between countrymen. They have a lot of very long held. Yeah, it's we were just talking to Bill Raggio about built an American style military with the Afghans, and that's not what they needed for that, for this particular fight that they're in. And it's a reminder that, we haven't been engaged in that kind of battle that they're engaged in. And it's something I've always believed is that we didn't quite understand Afghans well enough.
Never did.
And the culture.
Never.
You couldn't.
Not once.
Yeah, you weren't going to win there unless you understood that. And
we built I think, when I talk to people about what happened with the ANDSF, I think tagline is we built a rich man's army for an impoverished nation. And then we're shocked when they couldn't hold it because they didn't have the enablers. The Afghan Air Force was very good. I mean, they had some really good pilots. The commandos were very good. But it was the back half, the enablers, the logistical system, which was very complex. And by the time we started to hand it over to them, it was too late.
Right. And the contractors, right? That's what you're talking about when you're saying the logistical system, the fact that they were relying on contractors to be able to do.
So when people say there's 2,500 American soldiers there, and then you add the Europeans, that's great. There's also 20,000 contractors there. And that's the backbone. That's what people don't realize. The contractors there, they were the ones that were really training the Afghan Air Force maintainers. And, it's always hard to keep maintainers in Afghanistan because they tend to be enlisted, and so they don't make as much money, but they also speak fluent English usually, and so they're going to bounce. And it was always difficult to keep them there.
It's really interesting. The things that we've created with
Yeah,
our systems, you
yeah,
need those people, but yeah,
yeah,
I would take the opportunity also
yeah.
to move out of bounds. So let's fast forward back now
Okay,
to DC.
sure.
You're in this hotel.
Yeah,
2 weeks, right? You said of
yeah.
what were those weeks like? I mean, how much of that what was your everyday like, or did it
So
change day
yeah,
to day?
I walked out. I got into a cab. I got into an Uber, and I went to the hotel. My interpreter was there, um, and we just started like I had a list, and I just started kind of writing down people who we needed to get out. And so it's before I did anything, I kind of made a list, and I was like, we need to find all these people and find out where they are. Before I'd gotten up there, I'd already gotten some people into the airport. Some of my old interpreters, I'd already gotten them in. But then because I was up in DC, I had the contact information for some of our other contacts. So I just kind of racked and stacked out of like 100 people. I just kind of looked at it and was like, these are the people who are most at risk. And it was just me and my interpreter. And we were just like, these are the top 30, and that's what we did. We made a top 30 list, and he had his phones and I had mine, and then we started tracking where they were, and we had my former boss was in the airport, and he was still there, and so we were putting together packets of information for him on the guys that we needed to get in. And so we were feeding it to him, and he was able to start working down that list. So he would, I was up when the Afghans were up, I was down when they were down. Wake up in the middle of the night. I had my phones on full vibrate, and so I would get contact information constantly from them. And so, at the same time where I'm doing this, like the job, I'm also have my personal life where I have all these Afghans because I spent 3.5 years in Afghanistan, and I've gotten before I even arrived to DC, I started to help people, so I'm getting all this personal people reaching out to me as well. So at that time, Syncom was asking people to put packets together and like sending it to them, and there was a bunch of stuff. And so I was actually at that point, I was so overworked that I was having my wife like put together these packets. So, she was back here at home in this room I'm in right now. The baby was, playing around, and she was using PDF stuff to make packets and stuff. I would email her. I'd be like, because I didn't have a computer that was very good. So I'd be like, I'd email her stuff. I'd be like, I need this put into a PDF packet so I can send it to my boss. So, my wife, with the baby in the background making like passport packets for Afghans that we were trying to get into HKIA so they could have everything. It was completely insane. Working, it was the highs and lows of like getting people in, which was amazing, euphoric, and like something I never experienced before. And then, it was the lows of like, this guy's not going to make it. He's too far outside of Kabul. I don't know what to tell you. And then while that's going on, I'm also starting to get tasked from my higher headquarters to get other people in as well that weren't on my list. So we're getting outside organizations starting to come in. So like I got a bus full of John Hopkins like Afghan students in. There's like 100 of them in a bus. I got people, and then I got my old commander. So my wing commander reached out to me. Hey, I have one of my old war college buddies is trying to get in. Here he is. Can you get him in? Helping him in. So it was 2 weeks of like nonstop all the time, everywhere, and it was completely insane.
I
Yeah,
can't even imagine that. And
yeah, it was.
so how many was by by the end, as you're getting these contacts, you have your personal
Yep.
contacts, you have your top 30
Yep.
of the, most at risk. How many people were you trying to get in at maximum, do you think?
Uh, easy over 200. I was trying to get in. Um, I wound up getting over 150 in. Like if you count some of the buses and
Wow.
stuff like that we got in, and then I was using my boss to get in, and then I had other contacts that I knew. There were Afghans that were part of the like national mission units, 333, guys like that I knew that were working the perimeter, different gates that I knew that I was able to kind of wiggle my way in. It was there was no rank. There was just like who you knew, and like you just kind of worked the system. Um, and so I got people in various different ways, through the front gate, through the back gate, talking to Marines that I knew and stuff like that. They were able to like help me out, call in favors from different people.
Wow. So when you say 150 in, you mean like they got in and didn't get, none of these people got pushed back out by State
No,
Department
they
because
got
they
in.
all had
They all
packets
made
and
it in.
somebody to vouch for them. That's
Yeah.
very lucky for them. I can't, hearing people talk about having to send Afghans back
Yeah.
after getting in is just it. That I think was what finally broke me
Yeah.
on one of these podcast episodes. I couldn't handle it. It's like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Um,
Luckily, I think one of the things that when I saw it fall, I had when I started to see it fall apart, I reached out to about 10 former guys that I knew really, really, really well. And I was like, go to the airport right now. Just go. Just go and run. Because at a certain point in time, it's going to be harder for you guys to make it in. Go right now. And, I knew almost all the Afghan Air Force officers. And so a lot of them I reached out to and found them. And then, some of them, as like flew up to Tajikistan and kind of crashed and end up there as well. I have a buddy of mine who's one of the C-130 pilots. He flew down to Kandahar and picked up some of the last remaining ANDSF. And I was on the phone with him right before he left. It was like 14 August, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, don't go. And yeah, he was doing it a favor for some Americans to go down there and pick some guys up for him. So he flew down there, and he did that favor, and they were able to get some of his family in. So it was the Wild West. It was, yeah, I don't think I've really put it all together. But it was, I couldn't believe it was happening.
yeah.
You're just like,
Yep.
is this really happening? Like, this is up to me to do this right now. It's like, yeah.
It's been, and I have said this a lot on the podcast. I was not involved in that part
Mm,
of things, but hearing you talk about, your wife with the 1.5-year-old, my
yeah.
son was 1.5 when I
Yeah.
started doing work with Operation 620, and we would have calls, and my kid would just be sitting there in the background screaming because it's like, no, this is important. Something important is happening, and like, oh, you got to balance all this, and it's just everything, life went on, but it
Yeah.
felt like life kind of stopped when that
Yeah.
happened. And I knew, I mean, I left my job in Intel in 2013, and I
Mm,
knew when this goes bad, it's going to
mm,
go very bad.
yeah.
And it's still just, I had to stay away from it in the
Mm,
meantime because it made me so angry that it was continuing, but just limping along and it wasn't going to get fixed. And then,
sure.
oh, just August of 2021, I might not have been doing things, but I was floored. My life did stop. All I did was try to understand what is happening right now. How can this, even though I knew this will be bad, it
Yeah.
still just floored me. And,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
told my wife when I walked in I came back, and I told her, I was like, when this thing falls apart, it's going to destroy me. And it did. I, I, I think that, I was hoping that my hope was that they were going to make it to the winter. They would fight and they were hold to the winter, and they would be able to kind of rearm and refit. And this is when you kind of get some the criticism of Ghani and some of the senior members that they just didn't like plan to like really let some of these provinces go and like really put together a defensive plan around Kabul, and you could
Mhm.
see it. And so it was just really sad because the best fighting generals, they just didn't use them. It was just, you could see it the whole year I was there. It was just like this merry-go-round of corps commanders. It was really bad. But yeah,
Yeah, well, and it's like you say that I have so many friends who served who are like, why would you do this in the middle of the fighting season?
yeah,
Why would you abandon Bath? Why did you? It was a perfect storm of
yeah,
decisions that if they were tweaked slightly, you're right, it could have maybe held out till winter and had a different, there it could have been slightly different.
yeah, yeah. I think that, when you look back at it, there's a lot of things that I wish it would have been done better. But yeah, I just, those 2 weeks are a blur. I like the amount of people that reached out to me. Like, I was just completely overwhelmed. Um, it was just nonstop all day long, and and then the Suez, and then the Abbey Gate bomber happened, right? And at that point, that was it. Like, nobody else was getting in unless you were an AMSIT. That was it. And so that's when I started making phone calls to the Afghans, and calling them on the phone and telling them they were going to make it. And those were, I've made phone calls to people, parents of dead service members who were killed, and these phone calls that I had were excruciatingly difficult. People crying on the phone, sending me pictures of their babies, telling me, please get them out, reminding me of everybody, all the schools they went to, the United States, all that type of stuff, just flooding my phones, and I always say that the hardest ones weren't those. The hardest ones were the ones where the Afghans were just really nice to me and just thanked me for trying, because they had every reason to be upset with me because I didn't get him in. But I would say the majority of them were just like, we appreciate you even trying for us. And I told him that I would continue to try to get him out, and that I wouldn't stop. And I promised a lot of them that, like, look, I'm going to continue to fight for you, even though this part of the Neo is over with.
And so you did do that. You know
I
what?
did.
How? Let's talk about how that evolved from
Yeah.
2 weeks in DC to then returning to command
Yeah.
and trying to advocate for those Afghans that didn't get in on the Neo.
Yeah. I came back, and at that point, I probably have gotten, before the Neo, probably like 10 of my interpreters, previous deployments are in the United States. They're AMSITs, they're SIVs that I got them in. And so at that point, I'm talking to all of them, and I'm like, look, they have guys that they want to get out, family members. And, I still have my list of people that I'm trying to get out. And so we basically form our own little group. And I'm like, these are the people that I need you to like reach out to and work. And I'm going to, start figuring out ways to get some people out. At that point, I detached from the on the books portion of this whole event, and really started working off the books, latching on to different signal groups. God, I don't remember how many. There's hundreds of them. And then just really, I stumbled upon the Operation Sacred Promise. At that point, it was starting to really get formed. It had been formed during the Neo, and so I latched on there, and I also latched on to Allied Airlift as well. Started getting people on, but I just it just happened, and I just didn't want to give up on some of these guys. And at that point, as you know, like, in the first 3 or 4 months after the Neo is still the Wild West, and you could still get people out and in to different places, without fully sanctioned, blessings of everybody. People were chartering planes, they were smuggling people out, they were doing all sorts of stuff. It was, I always tell people, the Afghan Neo and the months afterwards is like the worst of the military because of what happened, and then also the best of like all these active duty service members and veterans, and then all the people who also worked in Afghanistan, like forming the backbone of the American government's evacuation response was just ordinary people. Yeah. And so like I just kind of stumbled into people and started forming networks, and like we just started moving people around. I mean, I had like at one point I was working, 8 hours a day as a commander. I would come home and I'd put another 6 hours in here, right where I'm speaking to you, and I would just grind all day, because it's like I'd have my phone on me, I'd fall asleep, I get a ring, it's like, hey, we got a slot. Who do you want to send? And it's like, kind of run up, throw them somebody. And so I kept on grinding and I kept on getting people out. I was, just very dogged about it. And, I just somehow, I don't know how I was able to survive doing that and being in command at the same time. I had a really good team around me. I got really lucky. And I was just like, yeah, this is going to be a lot for me. It was brutal on me mental health wise. Like it was just, I started going to therapy. I was just like breaking down. I tell people I spent 4.5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen a lot of combat, but the trauma I felt during the NEO and during afterwards is more than I ever saw in person in combat by far, and it's not close.
It's
sure.
What do you think? So seeing the therapist, was that helpful, or did you still find that you were hitting a wall there? What was that like?
Yeah. So I got diagnosed with combat PTSD in 2008. But this was something different. And I couldn't really kind of put my finger on it. And I kind of realized it was moral injury. And I tell people, combat PTSD, I've had chronic combat PTSD for a long time, but I've learned how to kind of deal with it, and I know what my triggers are and all that type of stuff. But this was something completely different, because I felt that I had been betrayed in everything that I had fought for. Had the narrative that I had built my life around had just come crumbling down. And so it was just, I think working on the NEO afterwards was a way of denial, of like not, like still working. I'm still going to do this. I can still get all these people out. I can still get these people out. I can still fix this. And there's, at a certain point in time, I think I realized probably in November or December, I was like, I don't know there's not much else I can do. You're getting,
Yeah.
I'm so finding AMSITs, I'm getting, LPRs, legal permanent residence, SIVs, all of it, and you're just like P1, P2s. I'd become an immigration lawyer, like part-time. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I have no idea what this is all about, but you learn, and you have to start like having very hard conversations with people. I mean, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people, you're the one that has to tell them like, hey, like, I'm sorry you can't take your mom. I'm really sorry you can't take your brother. I'm really sorry you can't take your daughter who's over 21. You're going to, I've had these conversations thousands of times, and it still happens to this day. Like I'm talking to somebody today who made it over, who I got out, and it's like, what should I do with my mom and dad? They have P1s. Should they go to a third country? Should they stay? And I'm just like, there are no good options. There aren't none.
Nope.
I can't make that call for you.
And that's the hardest thing. I mean, there would be people who would say, there's one woman that I've been talking with since probably November of 2021. Lovely, sweet woman, was forcibly married at 13, had, I think, 4 or 5 kids by 18, was beaten by her husband, and her husband worked with the Taliban and was trying to get her daughter to marry a Talib. And she's like, do I go to Iran? Do I go to Pakistan? And I'm thinking, I cannot advise you on that. And she thought she had a P1 referral, but she did not. And all these things, you've got all these stories, and they're not just stories, they're human lives. Yeah. And it's just like, it weighed on me so heavily that I ended up, that's all I did. I would just sit there and I would answer hundreds of messages every single day trying to help people. And what really kills me is we look at the USRAP today, all those P1 and P2 referrals who were like, oh, thank God I have a referral. something like 94% of them have not been processed. And
Yep.
those are the ones that got the referral after 46,000 were put forward, 26,000 got a referral, 94% still unprocessed. And so, of course, there's moral injury where you're, what is this? Bill Raggio said it, and everyone who comes on here says this in some way or shape or form. I used to be proud of my country, and then this happened. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm not saying you're saying that. I am. I felt very distinct, like what happened here. I used to believe in this country, and now I see this, and I've never been more devastated.
Yeah, it was devastating for me. I think P1s when they first, I didn't know anything about what a P1 was. And then I find out and you're like, oh, this is going to be the ticket, right? So this is what it's going to be. You're just going to get the P1 and then it's just going to happen, right? And then you realize that they were useless. I mean, they're better than nothing, right? But you just kind of like, it starts to dawn on me and probably January that like, I'm hitting a wall here and there's not much more I can do. I mean, I worked on Neo Afghan evac stuff nonstop for almost a year, like all day long. And finally kind of just started to disintegrate. And, it was, the Afghans that I knew they were getting killed in Afghanistan, the Taliban were hunting and killing them. I find it very interesting that I still run into people who think that the Taliban are not hunting these people. It boggles my mind. But yeah, I do it all the time. And I mean, I just, you're moving people into different places, moving them here and there, trying to get them out on different places. And then you just realize that like, there's not much else I can do. And I can just, try to like help you like check on your cases, the SIV cases, if you have one. At this point, just like, if you don't have an SIV case, like there's nothing I can do for you. You can do a P1. I had like, I referred like P1s like all day long. Like I had a lot of contacts in Afghanistan who I went to bat for and I got on P1 numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And after that, you're just like, there's nothing else I can do for you. If I get magic tickets, believe me, I still have a top 5 list of magic tickets. If somebody gives me one that I have it ready to throw at people. But at that point, you just kind of resign yourself to the fact that this is the way it's going to be. And it is a devastating thing to kind of come to terms with that because you're the one that has to have those conversations with people. I say, one of the tragedies of the all-volunteer force is that, we're the ones that fight the wars. And when they don't go that well, we're the ones that are also have to pick up the pieces. And losing a war is very difficult, right? Losing a war it hollows you out. But when you feel like your principles have been betrayed, that's even worse, I would say. Leaving people behind because we don't do that. And so when that happens, it's devastating and it creates, moral injury that just hollows you out. I deal with it all the time.
I think, and I'd like to, for listeners, viewers who haven't watched it, we did do an episode where you talked about moral injury and it stuck with me. The second we finished that recording, it was like in my head, what is the story? And it's, as I'm thinking of that now, like the story has to change. And how does the story change when all the messaging from the US government is, look how well we did on the NEO. Look, we have this US RAP program. Look, if you were here and your asylum is running out, you can apply to have your asylum renewed. But you and I and everybody who does this knows about the people who've come here who, claimed asylum and tried to come across the border and are now like being threatened with deportation. The people who are living in incredible uncertainty in Afghanistan, who are in Pakistan being threatened every day with, I just saw a video of the ISI beating the hell out of people because they're Afghan refugees and they want them out of Pakistan, where we told them, go to a country, if you want to be processed for P1, P2, go to a country where there's an operating embassy. Well, guess where there's an operating embassy? Across Torkham in Pakistan.
Yep.
And how many people fled that way in hopes of something, and now they're getting beaten by the ISI.
Yep.
So it's just really hard. Like, how do you begin to address that moral injury that the few people who still care about this are experiencing if you can't actually own up to the fact that this was done poorly, that there are so many humans at stake, and that people care about them. You know those people. You're not just, for me, I have come to know many of these people, but I still know them via the internet. I've never sat with them. I've never had a conversation with them in face to face. And so for somebody like you, or like anyone whose interpreter or whose colleague is over there, it's a very different.
I am. So I have an article coming out on the anniversary, the 2-year anniversary for the Bulwark, and it's about. So my TDY, I just came out of like an intensive inpatient treatment program on moral injury and PTSD, and I spent my entire month in treatment talking about Afghanistan. Like, it was about the people I left behind and how absolutely brutal that was for me. And I was a squadron. I finished squadron command, and successfully finished it. And 6 days later, I was in a treatment facility for PTSD and TBIs and a moral injury. And it's all like the impetus for it was all Afghanistan. And I wasn't the only one in there that was talking about Afghanistan, right? I mean, a lot of the guys in there, combat veterans, multiple tours. The number one thing that brought us all together is what the hell happened. And you could see the devastation on all of our faces about it. It is something that, at a certain point in time, like, you just can't keep on saying like nothing. At a certain point in time, somebody's gonna have to say something, because we owe it to the people to at least say, hey, this could have been done better, and these are the things that like we're gonna do to get it better. Because it should never have been up to me and like my interpreters to get people out, right? I mean, that's not how you want to do business. And the things that I remember are, having phone calls with active duty service members during that first year, and who hadn't been involved really, and like them crying on the phone or like having breakdowns, and me like trying to like help them, like, okay, hey man, like I can try to help you with this guy, like it's not a high percentage chance, but I'll try my best. And like, it's just like these psychic breakdowns that you're having left and right with people, who are coming to terms that we're going to leave these people behind. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I've heard we had an HKIA veteran come on who went to the VA and said, hey, I've got PTSD.
Yeah.
And they said, well, no, you weren't in a combat zone. And he said, I was at HKIA.
Yeah.
And they would not diagnose him with PTSD. And
Wow.
to me, that's just like,
that's crazy.
What in the hell? And that was with mostly OAR Foundation veterans, which I think that's a great initiative to get people who were there at HKIA together to talk about what they went through, without people saying, oh, there was no chaos from my perch. Sure. Without somebody saying what you experienced was not valid, without somebody saying, no, there was no PK firing going on after the suicide bomber, when those people who were there, many of them report having heard, or AK fire, not PK. Anyway, PKM. AK fire. PKM. Yeah. So old, man. All these things that are coming into my head are from way long ago. But
I always said that the tragedy is there's so many layers to it. And it's so awful, that people just turn their head away from it, like they did the last 20 years. And so it's up to like I told my wife, like, I will continue to like write about what happened and advocate about what happened, because somebody's got to remember, for the Afghans, because they deserve it. The real tragedy isn't like the tragedy. Yes, is for us at moral injury and all the PTSD, but the real victims are the Afghans we left behind. Like, the guys that I told that like I would fight next to, that I told that I would be there. we were the ones, and I did very often, make promises on behalf of this government, and it's brutal to be the one to have to do that and then see it fall apart.
Yeah. Oh, and I believed what we said too. I was absolutely, that's what got me involved in this. The US was saying, you fight with us, we're going to make sure that you're good to go. We won't leave until
Yeah.
things are good to go. And that's, I think, why when 2013 hit, and I'll always remember the moment when the Taliban raised their flag at the DOA office, like they were a government in exile. And I said, that's it. That's it. I had to put it away because I was going to lose my mind.
Sure.
And I was so angry. And here I am, this housewife in the middle of America, just like, I'm going to lose it, and then it all happened. And I think I did. I mean, I've hit many walls. I have run myself ragged, and I've had to do kind of the pull back and get into your real life too, because it's still you have to live your life and you have to help, but it's really important. I mean, these are humans. Everybody just saw the Thomas West meeting with the freaking Taliban, and you think, why? Because they're still doing all the same things. They're still killing people indiscriminately who are their enemies. They are still taking away all the rights from women. And then this meeting happens, and literally a week later, the Taliban then said, oh no, now girls are only going to be able to go to school till 10. That's what happened from that meeting. Like, good job, guys. Yeah, the Taliban are changed.
No. I mean, they're it's not going to happen. I saw it the last year there. Like, people were telling me that they were going to moderate. I ran into that a lot, and I was just like, just read what they say and listen to what they say. You should listen to people when they tell you who they are. And they've been saying this the entire time. This isn't new. They just have better technology now, and they know, and they're better at speaking English, and they're better at manipulating the West than they used to be. And so, that's what.
And they did lie in the beginning, because they did say, "Oh, well, our women will have the same rights as our sisters will have the same rights as our brothers," and they said that. And I just sat there and I thought, no. If you believe this, you are foolish.
Yeah.
And we did, because it was expedient to do that. And then thank God for the people who did what you did, what so many other volunteers did. And so before we wrap up, I want to hear about how did you, that first year you were really pulling hard and doing all these things, and what kind of was your process for, what is the involvement like for you now? How are you balancing that?
Yeah. So I told my wife when I came back from the NEO, from the 2 weeks, I was like, I'm going to give this a year. I'll give it 1 year of really hard. And so after the first year was over with, I was like, okay, I got to put this down. And so I had some people that I was still helping. And so it was kind of like, I had to start putting more barriers up, and no, I'm done, guys. And so, I am still part of OSP. There's not that many of us left, but I still help out a couple of the Afghans that I know that are American citizens. So I still do advocacy for them, and I still write about it. And I think that that'll be my ticket going forward, is really just being somebody who remembers and who remembers all the things that happened the final year, and then all the years I was there before that, because I remember all the things that we said and all the things that we tried to do while we were there, and I don't want us to forget what happened, because I don't want it to happen again, and we can't just turn the page like we did in Vietnam and then totally forget all the lessons like we did last time. I don't. I'll do my best on that, but my goal is to continue to advocate for Afghans as much as I can, but more in the writing realm instead of being case managers, because I just don't have the bandwidth for it anymore.
Yeah, that is I only very briefly did any case management, and it was very tough to do because there are so many concerns that Afghans have, and you have to, you need to be able to answer those, and trying to balance that with writing. I could not keep that up. The people who are still doing that, I think, are a special breed.
Yes.
But for me, writing it's the therapy of it.
Yep,
It's
for sure. Processing it all.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, being able to put it down and look at it later and say, in fact, it was helpful to me when I went back to the State Department because they told me, oh, this many P1 and P2s have been applied. And I said, actually, here's an article from last year where you told me it was double that. So can you maybe look at that again?
Mhm.
Like, come on, guys. So it can be helpful for a lot of reasons to
Sure.
remember the truths, to keep people honest, hopefully, because there are a lot of people who are still trying to forget
Yeah.
and tell us that no, we just need to, if we just talk to the Taliban, they're reasonable, they're diplomatic, they will let women do things again if we just talk to them right. Like,
Sarah June
hello?
Hakani's the Minister of Interior. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, whose house was Ayman al-Zawahiri staying at when he
Yep.
got a bomb in his forehead?
Yep.
That would be Siraj Haqqani's house.
Yep.
Yeah, it's absolutely um whew,
Yeah. It's a
there
lot.
are
And I
so
know you
many.
guys have Bill
Yeah.
Raggio in here. I mean, he's been right about this stuff for decades. So
Yep, that's why we wanted him to lead off this sub-series, because his map, he
yep.
was, and I've had this happen to me too, as I talked about in that episode, but being called basically a Taliban sympathizer for saying that the Taliban were not completely, backwater incapable people. They didn't have to be like us. They had to be successful for the field that they were in, and they
Sure.
were. So, and it's, especially when you said to them, well, you can't attack us anymore. Well, no, I have never talked about that. I wonder, what are your thoughts on that? When we said, well, if you stop attacking US troops, then you're
Hmm.
good. Like, and then it almost
Yeah. I mean, like the
made
whole
it easier
Doha
for
agreement.
them.
I think you can look back on it, and there was a point in time when I first started. I was like, well, what is this going to be like? What are we doing? Because I think when first started getting into it, I was like, I think it was obvious at that point that we were, at least a lot of the people were just done with it, right? So you're like, okay, well, let's see what happens here. Um, but I think that when all that type of stuff got out, like you don't have to attack us and all that, because it was open and people knew about it, and it was just the problem with that, among many different things, was that it just sapped the morale out of the ANDSF. I mean, it was just like, you can't like go up and tell them to fight harder when you're like, well, you just cut a deal with these guys not to attack you, right? So it's easy
Right.
for you to say that. Like, what are you
Well,
talking
and they
about?
didn't even get a voice. The Afghan
Right.
government got no voice. So
Yeah.
when you've propped up, and I mean, the Taliban called them a puppet government on
Mhm.
purpose because we did prop them up. I mean, we were puppeteering the way that they were. And so when we said, oh, well, we're not even going to include you, it's just us and the Taliban, like, to me, that would be the point where I was like, it's time to figure out what the next step is, because I'm not going to be in it.
Yeah, the whole Doha piece, like, when I was there, you could just tell that when the 5,000 were released, that was a huge
Mhm.
deal. And then, I remember when they started doing the inter-Afghan dialogue. It was just very obvious that the Taliban were just stringing them along. They were debating over the minutia of like holding the talks, and the big breakthrough when I was there was that they had agreed on a format to have the talks in, right? And so it was just like this huge delaying tactic by them. And while they were doing this, they were making battlefield gains, and their assassination campaign was just increasing, all inside of Kabul, and it was really, really deadly and really effective. Um, and unfortunately, at that point in time, uh, yeah, like a lot of the good generals were just not there, and it was just, yeah, it sapped the morale out of the ANDSF, and you can see it in Ukraine. Like, morale is important. Morale is the will to fight is an important thing, and when you lose that because your allies are leaving, and you can see that they're heading for the doors, it saps your will. And so it's easy to say the Afghans didn't fight. 68,000 of them died, 3,300 the last year, right? But at a certain point in time, the Taliban, like they were a state sponsored insurgency from Pakistan, right? I mean, so they had their sponsor, and they stuck with them. I mean, if they didn't have Pakistan providing material support and a safe haven, they wouldn't have. They would not have been as successful, right?
Yep.
But their backer stayed into the game, right? I mean, this isn't.
Yep.
I'm not revealing national secrets. I mean, the ISI chief was the first visitor after Afghanistan fell, right? I mean, he was the first guy, and his quote was, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay."
Yep. They just hold up in the places where we could not go get them.
Yep.
Very easily. And as Bill said in the episode that will air first of this series is, you know, it's insane the percentage of Taliban senior leaders that are unchanged or the, like, you know, the sons of the originals from 2001 period. So, 98 to 2001.
Yeah.
They're the same. They stayed in safe places. They were well hidden. And it was a cluster and a very complicated problem. And as my mother reminded me this morning, you just don't invade Afghanistan and expect to be successful. She's a history teacher, and that's that was her reminder. You know, it's not an easy. It's a country that has centuries of difficulties.
Sure.
You know, roiling about inside of it. And I think this has been such a, like, your insights from before to throughout are really so valuable. And is there anything you think we missed or anything you want to say to listeners before we sign off here?
Yeah, I think, you know, my thing is that I think it's when we talk about Afghanistan, we should always remember the Afghans as the main victims in this whole thing. They're the number one victims in this whole thing. We tend to focus on this only through the American lens of like what it did to us, what it's done to veterans and combat and all that stuff, and that's very important. But the real victims, the ones whose country's been completely turned upside down, are the Afghans, and they're the ones that are suffering. They're the ones that suffer every day. The war continues for them.
Right. We only stopped it for us.
Yep, for sure.
That was it. And not for everybody, because people like yourself are still fighting. People who are going in to save their colleagues or who are going back to save their parents.
Yep.
Those people didn't get to leave the war. So absolutely. And that just brings me to, you know, we usually like to end these episodes with a story from an Afghan, because it is, you know, talking with fellow Americans about this is one thing. And that's it's great because we do have things to process, but really this is ongoing for Afghans. And we always want to end with stories from people who are still experiencing the pain of the post-withdrawal period, or who experience pain during the war. Anything, any experience is valid and we want to share it. So if you have a story, send it to us. It can be any format you like, and it can go to our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Well, this has been really enlightening. I've learned so much, and it's been a really enjoyable time. So thanks for joining us again to talk
Thanks for having me
Afghanistan.
On. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you. Thanks to all our listeners for sharing your time and supporting the people of Afghanistan. Tasha Kaur, and we hope to see you again soon.